Monica Kretschmer, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Universal Women's Network, Woman of Inspiration Awards, and this is the Woman of Inspiration podcast, where we speak with women who lead, inspire, and motivate. Today with me is Jacqueline Wallace. She is the Vice President and Marketing Communications for Mitacs. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Monica. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for those listeners, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background of your experience before we dive into our awesome interview today. Jacqueline is responsible for setting this strategic direction for all of the communications and marketing efforts to increase market competitiveness and visibility among stakeholders while establishing the Mitacs brand as a high-performing thought leader in the Canadian innovation ecosystem. Jacqueline also has a PhD in communications, where her research was focused on creating economies and promises and prohibitions of creative work for women entrepreneurs. Now, I also know that you're a founder and a serial entrepreneur as a number of startups, and this is really interesting for our listeners, all in the creative industries, but most notably, you were the founder of Veer Inc., which was an award-winning visual media and design company that was acquired by Bill Gates and the Corbis Corporation. Super exciting. I'm looking forward to diving in, talking about your role at Mitacs and everything that Mitacs does to help support entrepreneurs in the space of tech. And I'd love to talk about your leadership journey. So how about we start with the very beginning? Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I really wanted to be a teacher, an educator of some sort. So either like a grade school teacher or a professor. I think that was always in the back of my mind. I always loved going to school in September and new school supplies and, you know, really all of it around it. And so, yeah, was to be a teacher.
And so as a teacher, I can see the connection with the PhD and the continuous learning and quest for knowledge. But how did you navigate or become such an expert in the area of creative design?
So I was really fortunate that my first job out of university happened to be with a visual media company. It was called iWire. It was based in Calgary. And it was really as e-commerce was coming online. And so I've always been a creative. I've always been a creative person, loved to draw and always creatively inspired as a kid. But that first job really drew me into the creative space as an industry. So, you know, that mixture of creativity and commerce. And so that's where I got my feet wet, very much in a digital sphere, in e-commerce, and bringing creative assets to designers and producers working in advertising, film, so that they could do really great work with visuals that made their work stand out.
Interesting. And so from that, you know, I always like to talk about that career path journey. Would you say it's been linear or a little bit sort of, you know, this way and that way?
Yeah, I often talk about my career in sort of 3 acts. And so the first phase is very much a series of startups. And you spoke about Veer, and Veer was an opportunity that came to me with a group of folks that came out of the iWire experience, actually. And we came together as a small management team and went back into the similar space. But instead of going in with sort of like a very big Walmart type approach, we went in with quite a curated, design-oriented aesthetic. And so there were already 2 major players in that industry. And so Corbis was one of them, and another company that many will recognize, which is Getty Images. You see their byline on all kinds of editorial photography and entertainment photography and so on. And so with Veer, we took this very design-driven approach, focusing on designers, maybe at smaller agencies, boutiques, and we were able to create this relationship by sort of talking their language and having the same types of cultural references that, you know, creative people, they understand aesthetics. They're very much into pop culture and different references. And so we really played on that a lot. And so not only did we sell visual media and really curate it to be kind of a collection that maybe had a bit more edge to it, was a little bit less bread and butter, all those kind of classic stock photography handshakes that you see. So we tried to play a little bit outside of that. And that brought us a huge following. And we were able to grow the business from zero to over $200 million in the first 3 years. And I'd always had a real interest. I studied French and German in my undergrad, and so really wanted the opportunity to go and work internationally. And so I took on the VP international role at Beer and went to Berlin and spent 3 years in Berlin opening up the operation there. And it was just one of those like fundamental experiences of my career where I got to lead the starting this operation. I'm in a different country, be able to bring in really great creative talent from Europe and create a whole new market entry into the European market. And so it was just fantastic. Agent stage where you can, go to museums and travel through Europe, and I really just enjoyed it and being in that kind of design creative space. And then shortly after that, Corbis came along and acquired Veer, which for sure is sort of one of the tantamount experiences of my career, being acquired as a company, but also then moving into another company, which was 3-4 times the size of Veer, offices around the world. And so I took on the role of the vice president of global brands of web platforms. And this was an interesting experience too, where you have to bring together lots of different corporate cultures. We had this real design-oriented, brand-oriented boutique business, and Corbis was a much bigger player. And so this was being a leader where I could unify and bring in diverse teams around the world, really, under a series of 3 different brands. And so it was really an incredible experience. I got my wings there for sure. Got to kind of play in the big leagues of corporate culture as well. And it was just an absolutely fabulous experience.
And so after that, I mean, that only seems like about, I would say, under 10 years.
Yeah. So
what was that span? Like, that sounds like a wild ride.
Yeah. So that was sort of the first 10 years of my career. And then I was fortunate enough to, have the opportunity to kind of take a bit of a break and reassess after Corbis. And I really wanted to go back to school and do a PhD. So this is where sort of mid-career, not everyone makes these types of decisions, but I decided, okay, I really want to go back to school. I did a PhD in communications, really focusing on that first 10 years of work and understanding what did it mean to be a woman in leadership in the creative space. And, there was definitely bumps in the road where didn't feel like your voice was fully heard, or that you had the authority to kind of take advantage of what your vision was and strategy would be. And I was a young woman too at this stage, right? So I was kind of navigating that, learning about, when do I need to prove myself, and when can I really feel solid and confident that I have proven myself, and I have a vision and understanding and skills and talent to be able to bring. And so that's where I sort of flipped the script a little bit and went back to school to do the doctorate and research the space that I just spent 10 years working in, looking at women's creative work. What does it mean to be a woman in leadership in the creative space? And I did a deep dive into kind of microeconomies of creativity. And so design and craft, actually, and did a big study of Etsy, the global marketplace that many will know around craft and design, because so many women have these sort of micro entrepreneur shops and make a living off the side, or sometimes it becomes a full-time gig. So I really wanted to kind of understand the dynamics of women in creativity in that context too. So yeah, after 4 years, I finished a PhD, and then I spent a bunch of time consulting. It was really that phase where I could bring together all of my skills. I've always considered myself a bit of a hybrid: business, creativity, academia. Yeah, I did a bunch of consulting, and then finally I landed at Mitacs a couple of years ago, and that's really given me an opportunity to come into the innovation space for a not-for-profit, national, across the country. So it's really been different experiences, but when you kind of look at them all together, kind of more of a portfolio style career, but something I've really enjoyed.
Well, what I always find so interesting is the career path and the timing, because someone might think that you've done your school in a block, and then once you're done school, that you're off to the races, and then you start your business, and then you evolve into something else. But you've actually went into that PhD, probably, sitting in that class going, already have lived like a life and really brought to the table so many rich experiences. So what was that like going back to school with all of those experiences and success under your belt?
It was really, in a way, it was like a really free experience because I'd already had accomplishment and done a lot of the big things that I wanted to do. And so I was able to be a bit more playful and take courses that I wouldn't have necessarily thought I would take. I took an incredible course about the North and media in the North, and how we have all these kind of tropes and understanding of what the North means. But it doesn't necessarily mean that to the people who actually live there. And so it was really, yeah, it was very sort of free time. At the same time, so a little bit humbling too, right? Because I had all the success and been in corporate jobs and worked around the world, and then I was all of a sudden a student, and there's a bit of a level playing field. Everyone is a student, who has to have to sort of deliver the same kinds of things. And so it was a mix, I would definitely say. But the other piece I would say is I have lifelong friends now coming out of that cohort, and other women that I value extraordinarily, who are either now working as professors in academia, or who might have gone back to the private sector working, in film and TV and broadcast. And so it was also a really great experience from that perspective too.
So what I'd like to talk about is support network. I think that's really important. And as you know, even with your work with Mitacs, like there is a degree of that support network. You see, female entrepreneurs at various stages of their business. How important is it to have a support network?
It's foundational to everything you do. For me, I always joke that I have a constant group text with my sisterhood, and support network of other women to be able to not just bounce ideas, but also to be really vulnerable, to talk through fears, to get that pep talk that you need, or to give that pep talk. And to realize that as women, we show up at work, but we have all parts of ourselves, right? So we're full humans. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids, one of which has a disability. So that taught me a lot. And, the women that have kind of walked beside me and walked with me have been through all those places with me. And so I see that now in terms of, where I've landed at Mitacs and having other, incredible women in the organization. But also, I think you need that support network. You need a place where you can be real and honest and have all the feelings without judgment, and being able to just be, fully unapologetically who you are, and know that they'll be there to have your back.
And so what has been some of the best advice that you've ever received?
I would say that really being aware of the stories we tell ourselves, the limiting beliefs that we maybe kind of taken on over our lifetime, and being really aware of those stories that we tell ourselves, like, are they actually true, and maybe do they need to be challenged? I love when my kind of female support network, other women entrepreneurs and professionals and friends, they kind of challenge you, like, what is it that's holding you back from getting on the other side of your fear? And when is it maybe time to just actually slow down and honor yourself, and step back a bit, and not always be driving, and to realize that there's different stages and seasons of life, and it's not always, going at 100%. In fact, it takes a certain level of courage to slow down and maybe reflect a bit more than kind of just keep powering ahead.
So you touched on this a little bit. You have your squad and your tribe of support networks that you trust, to give you also encouragement, but also tell you when to pull back a little bit. But have you ever experienced imposter syndrome? And if you have, how have you overcome it? Because that is one of the questions that I want to ask every single woman, because it is so, I don't think I've met a woman except Hazel McKellian that hasn't experienced it.
I think it's really, really prevalent for all women. I have a friend who reframed it for me once, and she said that imposter syndrome is really just learning to stretch. And so rather than sort of that side of it where we're fearful or we feel like we're in over our heads, if we just look at it a little bit different, we shift it just slightly to think, okay, I'm actually just stretching and learning and growing and giving myself somewhere to perhaps make a few mistakes. And for me, that was also like quite liberating to think, okay, well, yes, we commonly, like we all kind of go through this, but if I think about it as more that I'm stretching and learning and trying new things, it's a little less daunting and terrifying than, being in that place of like, oh, I'm an imposter and maybe I can't do this. So that was another really great kernel of advice.
Great advice. I love your perspective on that, because anything that we're trying that's new is going to be uncomfortable. And that fear is right there, ready to help you kind of say, yeah, don't do it. Don't do it, girl. It's uncomfortable. But that is where the biggest opportunities have come from. So what I would love to know is, what are some of the barriers? I mean, you now lead a team and you're in an industry that is still blazing the trails. I know that Mitacs is an award presenter for Women of Inspiration in the field of Trailblazer for STEM. What I'd love to know from you and your experience actually in that same position, what are some of the challenges for women carving their space in the tech industry?
Yeah, I mean, the tech industry is still very heavily dominated by men. STEM in particular is still very heavily dominated by males. And so really it takes a lot of courage for young women to go into the STEM professions, but it's so incredibly important because they have so much to bring. And so I think, some of the barriers are making sure that we introduce our girls early to all kinds of learning, right? And that it's sort of, we take some of the labels off. And so it's not necessarily science or math or coding, but it's learning a different way to think and being able to kind of introduce and have those questions early on. And at Mitacs, I think one of the tremendous bits of work that we do is, we are a matchmaker. So we take highly skilled talent from our academic and post-secondary system and match them with industry and community partners who need their skills and really want to advance their innovation agenda. And that sort of opened up an opportunity for young female graduate students to get hands-on experience in industry environment and be able to kind of learn and navigate and maybe ask some of the questions earlier and get mentors earlier in their careers so they can understand, what it maybe does mean to be in a male-dominated industry and what does it feel like to be interrupted or talked over, and how do you learn skills, and where do you create your allyship with other women to maybe co-mentor or peer mentor each other and support each other through those kinds of experiences. And we've had so many tremendous, female graduates come through the Mitacs programs who are doing incredible work in biosciences and health and artificial intelligence, fintech. Also on the community side, in terms of social innovation, we work with wonderful, incredible Indigenous researchers and students. So it's also our responsibility as an organization to make sure that we are taking down barriers to entry and opening up different pathways to come into innovation and to make sure that women have those pathways. And so, we certainly fund a lot of internships for young graduate students and young women to get those hands-on experiences in industry. And when we see things like our partnerships, like with you, we're able to showcase the great work of our interns. Just recently, we had our Mitacs Entrepreneur Awards, and exceptional talent rewarded. And one of the interns that really stuck with me, her name's Iris Rettinger, and she started a company called Material Futures. And Material Futures really looked at the impact of petroleum-based dyes in textiles and fashion. And so Iris had come up in the lab with a way to kind of grow organic dyes. And she's now working with Lululemon and other partners. And, the Mitacs funding that she received and the partnership the industry academic partnership really gave her that kind of turbo boost, to get this innovation out to market. And that's just one small example of all the many, many projects and amazing, female students and entrepreneurs that we work with.
I bet there's no shortage of businesses and companies that are looking for that talent.
Absolutely. This is something in Canada, we have such a strong post-secondary system. So we really do a good job of doing pure research in the lab, and where some of our challenges are is taking that out of the lab and getting it into the commercial space. And so that's where Mitacs is, our whole model and program, and that ability to match make is really tremendous. And it's bringing Canada and advancing our innovation agenda, and we bring together all partners in the ecosystem. So, whether it's government or industry or, Universal Women Network, it's really important that we think of innovation as an ecosystem and as a way of not just advancing science or tech, but ultimately advancing quality of life. And that's a fundamental, value of what we're trying to do, is make life better for all Canadians, from wherever they come from.
And so I have to ask you, it sounds like your network was already, created such an opportunity to enable more women to have exposure and then companies to access that. What happened during COVID? Like, how was that? How did your did that help, or were you able to serve more? Because everything was very, tech centered through that time. So maybe just talk a little bit about what that was through COVID.
Yeah, so maybe I would think about COVID in two ways. One is the way that the move to remote work and to a more kind of realist understanding of, the other responsibilities that people have. So if you're a parent and your kid shows up in a Zoom call, that actually was really normalized, right? And the fact that we have these varied lives and different responsibilities and different parts of us as humans and as women in particular, I think that was a big advantage. The other thing I would say, I'm a very strong advocate for inclusive design and accessibility. And so it also, us being networked and working through technology and not necessarily having to leave the house, one of the benefits is that it actually made it more accessible, particularly with people with disabilities or, people who maybe aren't as extroverted and yet could do good work. And so I'm very hopeful that we can kind of keep some of those changes as we kind of go back into whatever this post-pandemic life looks like. And I would say for Mitacs in particular, we did get additional funding from the federal government. And so that actually really helped us support small, medium enterprises in particular, who are obviously struggling a little bit, as everything shut down and they had to pivot to digital maybe. And so that really allowed us to provide a lot of support. We did virtual internships. So different ways of sort of taking the model, but adjusting it for the realities of the pandemic. And coming out the other side of it, we've seen really exceptional success. And we're, kind of doing next phase of projects with partners that we've worked with now that maybe they've opened up a whole new market, or, they've advanced a certain kind of technology or built new communities. So there's definitely some silver linings to the pandemic for sure.
And so that was kind of a nice segue into my next question is, where do you see that next chapter and that opportunity to bring your leadership to the table, and also for, growing the programs that Mitacs is into?
Yeah, one thing that when you think about inclusive design, so that is for designing for people who are at the margins, but in fact, those designs actually benefit everyone. So the simple example I always love to give is just the fact on your smartphone, you can, increase your font size or decrease it at any time. Well, that invention was, very useful for people with low vision, but isn't it useful for all of us when, we're needing to look at our screen and we need to kind of zoom into something, or we're on Google Maps or whatever that may be? There's a small example, but those kinds of principles is what I also really think the next phase is bringing that into leadership, right? So it's not just about product design or program design. Like fundamentally as leaders, how do we ensure that we're designing our approach and making sure that our values align with ensuring like that we're really taking those at the margins and those viewpoints and maybe what has not been kind of normalized as culture, and bringing it in. So making sure there's all kinds of voices at the table, and maybe disrupting things a little bit when they've gotten a little bit too stayed in one way, shape, or form, right? So those kinds of things. And for Mitacs, we're continuing to grow. We've added, many more people to the team, and have more funding from the federal government and our provincial partners. And so we continue to really kind of expand how many internships and work integrated learning opportunities we can do. And ultimately, working to, like I was saying before, like really increase innovation in Canada, but ultimately have a big impact on quality of life, on sustainability, on climate, some of those major concerns that I think we all share.
Beautiful. Well, I would love to actually go back even into, so you've got the leadership vein and the wealth of experience that you're bringing to, women. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that, about the visibility of leaders. And I know that that's, I shared a stat that I, just read the other day, and it was by the Gates Foundation, ironically, that was, to achieve equality, we are even 100 years behind what our original, kind of what we saw in the forecast, which 2108. And I thought, oh my goodness, we really need leaders in the spotlight right now. So why, Catherine, sorry, I think I did this before. My apologies, Jacqueline. So why is it so important, Jacqueline, that we really elevate female leaders now more than ever?
I really fundamentally feel that female leaders bring a mix of the type of leadership that acknowledges not just ambition, but what I like to call an ethic of care. And so the type of leadership that we need now needs to look at the way systems have been built, and really demolish them, and integrate, ideas around care, ideas around community, that we can build businesses and be entrepreneurial, get access to funding in ways that don't have to always be hyper competitive, but that actually value, what are the outcomes that are going to create quality of life, that are going to create more equity, that are going to create more inclusion, and that are going to consider principles of, where we need our planet to be, but also, why we need women at the table at least 50%, because we bring concerns, we bring experiences, and we bring styles of leadership that ultimately can drive the kind of change that we really need as a country, as a globe. And the more women we have at the table, I mean, that stat is terrifying, let's be honest. We do not want it to take another 100 odd years. But the more we can have those perspectives at the table, I mean, there's plenty of research to show that it does creates change in a way that is genuinely more innovative, more creative, more inclusive. And there's absolutely no question that it has to be a priority, and it has to be built into the structures. It has to be built into how we create boards, how we do VC funding, how we create programs like the ones at Mitacs, where ensuring gender parity is a priority. So all of those kinds of things, I think, contribute to ultimately having the kind of sustainable leadership that we really need, big picture.
Great answer. And I love that. And a couple of, as kind of just going back to what you were mentioning earlier, Jacqueline, about the young woman who came out through the program and then was able to bring her innovation to life and, really make an impact with Lululemon. And I think those success stories, even your success story, sharing your journey with your company, before in your earlier stages, right? I mean, so important when you see it, and you see another woman in leadership role, you're like, if she can do it, so can I. And so celebrating the accomplishments is also really important. And I know that's harder for leaders because they don't want the spotlight. They say it's not about me, right? Does that resonate with you at all?
It absolutely does, because I often, want to make sure I'm showcasing my team and everyone else around me. And so, but it's also an important reminder. And, I've had this through my female peers, and, we do need to celebrate our accomplishments. We do need to bravely and boldly be able to, and kind of unapologetically celebrate those accomplishments. And they do move us all forward, even when we're not necessarily craving the spotlight.
Well, and I think I like to, I'm one of those individuals that look at the other lens, because if you don't share your successes and pave the road for us, then the others don't, it might take them longer to do it. They'll have to learn a few more mistakes, but if you can share the wisdom and bring others up, I think it's, I think it's valuable. And the 5% of women didn't get there because somebody didn't help them succeed or show them the way. So I'm really thankful that there are leaders like yourself that are willing to share and step into the spotlight, because we need more of it. Definitely more leaders like yourself sharing their stories of successes and opening up the doors for opportunities for other women and championing them. So we're almost near the end of our podcast. And I know that we talked about, celebrating women and, women of inspiration, women that we admire. So who have some of those female leaders been in your world that you admire?
Oh, such a great question. I would say Malala is certainly someone who I often read her story to my daughter, and we talk about her experiences and the change that she's brought. I'm very fortunate that I've had wonderful sort of female matriarchs in my own family, and so my own mother and my own grandmothers who were very entrepreneurial and who kind of broke the mold early in the era when maybe women weren't doing some of these things. Honestly, I also heard Viola Davis the other day, I think she was at TIFF, saying that even in her career she's had to beat so many barriers. And she said something to the effect of, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And that's really sat with me, like, why is it that we need to kind of get through that path? But it's part of, going through your own leadership journey and coming to the other side, and so that you can kind of get past that fear and take on whatever it is that you desire and that your dreams are.
I love that quote. I had to write it down, actually. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. And it is so true. And especially if we're talking about imposter syndrome, there's so many great parallels. And if we look at her career, people are just stepping into their power. And this is when we talk even about the age, when I interviewed Hazel, I just turned 50 and she turned 100. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
Right. I've got now 50 more years. And so it really, age is not a barrier anymore. And your experience is, pure gold. So thank you for sharing that with us, because I think it's really important to keep in mind. And so what I'd love to really close with is your definition of a woman of inspiration.
To me, a woman of inspiration is someone who shows up unapologetically themselves, with their beauty and their grace, but also their challenges and their fear, that they can lead with both courage and compassion. They definitely create space and room for other women and younger women. I love what you just said about age, that age is not a barrier, and that we should be, triumphantly proud of what we've accomplished and where we're at our age in life. And a woman of inspiration is someone who's brave, ultimately someone who's brave and who can take on whatever personal causes or values or what's important and close to their heart in a way that is genuinely brave and kind of a bit doesn't care about other people's, kind of judgments on it. So I think that's really ultimately what a woman of inspiration is.
I couldn't agree more. Unapologetic is really what a woman of inspiration is, and owning the spotlight, owning her worth is so, so important as a role model for young women. Of course, so you have 3 kids and daughters, sons?
2 boys and a little girl. And my first guy was born with a disability, and he changed my life, because you see things through very different eyes when you start to interact with being on the margins, or being perceived as having less ability. So he's been my greatest teacher, honestly. And as a leader, I now bring that into everything I do, kind of inclusive principles and design. And he's also taught me to be fearless, because every day he has to go out and be courageous. And so, why can't I do that too? And of course, he's a little boy, but our sons teach us lots of things too. And we need to also bring them along in this journey as strong women.
Well, I love it. I'm a boy mom as well. And as you know, support hers are a really big piece of the Universal Women's Network. I really, truly believe that bringing our allies to the conversation is going to help us achieve that equality. And so I love to see how you're raising a strong young man that's courageous, that's actually really supporting you in your role of empowering women. So I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. How can our listeners and our viewers find out more about either your career path and connect with you, or about some of the programs and the initiatives that Mitacs has on board?
Well, certainly with Mitacs, you can check out our website at mitacs.ca, and all of our social channels, Mitacs Canada. And personally, on LinkedIn, I'm Jacqueline Wallace. Same thing on Twitter. And I'd love to hear and chat further with your community.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. It was a great podcast. So many words of wisdom that you shared. You're so articulate and just a wealth of experience. And I'm in awe of what you've achieved so far. And the road ahead is like huge. So thank you so much. Any last words for our audience today?
I think it's keep your sisters close, that you need that sisterhood for the good days and the not so good days. So make sure you always have a good group text that you can quickly chime into when you need a hand.
Love those group texts. So thank you everyone for joining us. That was the Woman of Inspiration podcast. We were speaking with Dr. Jacqueline Wallace, and she is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Mitacs. So thank you so much, Jacqueline, for joining us. And to those listeners, we invite you to share widely with your networks. You'd never know that one person in your network that this conversation is going to help pull them through the other side, motivate and inspire them to do some great things. So thank you so much again, Jacqueline, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon.
Thank you so much, Monica.